Good morning, everybody. This is Dr. Kristy Taylor. I am a social impact career coach and founder of Work Solutions LLC. And I am so excited to be here with you this morning on the second edition of our Diversity Works Roundtable, where we are focused on breaking barriers, building bridges, and fostering inclusive communities for people with disabilities. Many of you may know it is Disability Pride Month. And so I just want to start by educating you, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Kirk. We have several great guests with us here today. Anthony, Tekedra, Michelle, and Latrea. They're going to all have an opportunity to introduce themselves in just a moment. So we're going to start off by me quickly just educating you on Disability Pride Month. The Disabilities Act signed into law on July 26, 1990. It aims to provide visibility, awareness, and acceptance of individuals in the disability community. This month encourages people with disabilities to take pride in their identities, challenge stigmas, and advocate for equality and inclusion. Throughout the month, you may have seen events such as this and activities that often include parades, educational programs, and community gatherings, all focused on celebrating the achievements and contributions of individuals with disabilities. So that just gives you a little bit of background. I'm looking forward to such a great conversation today. I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, Dr. Kirk Adams, to share a little bit about himself, and then we'll kick it off with a quick around the room, and we will start the discussion.
Thanks, Kristy. So Americans with Disabilities Act, that is our Civil Rights Act. People with disabilities. It's really modeled and came after the civil rights movement of the 60s, and it took us a while. 1990, it was signed into law. But I am Dr. Kirk Adams, talking to you from my office in Seattle, Washington. I am the immediate past president and CEO of the American Foundation for the Blind, which was Helen Keller's organization. Prior to that, I led the Lighthouse for the Blind here in Seattle. And my field of study, my PhD, is in leadership and change. So very interested in leadership. Very pleased to be here with you, Dr. Taylor, and can't wait to meet the panelists.
All right, so let's do a quick around the room. We'll start with Anthony.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, for wherever you're watching around the world. My name is Anthony Frisina, founder of Above and Beyond, bridging the gap to accessibility and inclusion. And I'm actually coming to you from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And it's nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you. Michelle.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Steiner. I'm a blogger at Michelle's Mission. I also am a disability writer, speaker, photographer, and paraeducator. I work in a school with students who have disabilities. And I also live in Pennsylvania with my husband, Ron, and our two cats, Jack and Sparrow.
Thank you so much. Latrea.
Hello, excuse me. Hello, my name is Latrea Russ. I am a disabilities empowerment coach. I work with young children that are disabled as well as their parents, just helping them navigate through this whole crazy gamut of disability. I'm also a preschool teacher, writer, and speaker, and I'm from Wilmington, North Carolina.
All right, and our final person is Tekedra. She's having technical difficulties at the moment, so we are going to jump right into the conversation. When Tekedra comes back, we'll give her an opportunity to introduce herself. I'm actually going to start with you, Latrea, and ask the first question to kick off the conversation. So you talk about your level of advocacy and your journey through numerous surgeries. And I know that you've written a book, and we're going to be sharing all of that information today. Latrea, so when it comes to your journey with surgeries and your work as a disabilities empowerment coach, is truly really inspiring. So when you talk about what strategies do you find most effective in empowering individuals, because that's the theme of today with disabilities, to achieve their fullest potential, what have you found to work best for you, or what recommendations and approaches? I would love just to hear more about your experiences.
Okay, well, for me, what I find to work is that I use my story. I have a disability, and I've been through a lot of what children today are going through as it relates to disability. So I use a lot of my experiences and how I kind of got through, and I also allow them to feel like it's okay to feel what they're feeling. Like it's okay to feel like, you're different. Because at the end of the day, you are, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being different. There's nothing wrong with, like I like to say, having an extra puzzle piece. but it's all about how you use that puzzle piece and what you tend to do with that puzzle piece that makes you unique, that allows you to stand out. So, and I also work with parents as well, because a lot of times parents have no idea where to go, what to do, and how to process this whole disability thing. And I, being a parent myself, having a daughter that has a disability, I kind of understand. So once again, I go back to my experiences, and I go back to the challenges that I face, and I go back to those experiences, because I believe that those experiences is what allowed me to be what I am. I believe that those experiences have equipped me to be able to help other people in various situations.
And I can agree with that too, because whenever I work with students, I work with middle school age students, and I have a learning disability. So sometimes I feel like it's here me recording of myself. I hate having my disability. I hate having an individual education plan, but I get to be that voice that tells them it's okay to have a disability. It's all right to have that plan. And this is what we're going to do to help you. And I get to show them how to advocate for themselves.
Right, right. And that's also very important too, because I think a lot of times when people have a disability, they are less likely to advocate for themselves because they don't want it.
Yeah.
They wish they didn't have it, or they wish it would disappear or whatever. So therefore, in their mind, advocating for themselves is actually shining a light on something that they wish didn't exist. So therefore, they're less likely to advocate for themselves because I don't want anybody to know this about me. I don't want anybody to
Yep.
have to know that I deal with this. So if I were to advocate about this, then that means, oh my God, it's putting a spotlight on me. Oh my God, it's putting
Smart.
a spotlight on this flaw that I have that I worked so hard to hide, or I worked so hard to cover this flaw up. And when I advocate for myself and the things that I might need in certain situations, then that means, oh no, they're gonna know. They're gonna know that I'm not like everybody else. They're gonna know that I have a flaw and I have a different that sets me aside and sets me apart. But in understanding and realizing and recognizing that that's okay, that allows them, that gives them the ammunition to advocate more.
Far too often, disability has been deemed as a negative, and we need to eradicate that stereotype and that stigma that disability is not a negative. It doesn't need to be cured, it needs to be accepted. We need to understand that one person with a disability is one person with a disability, and the older generation of disability needs to be more out there, prevalent to educating that younger generation of a disability and our allies. We need to be able to include everybody of all abilities, to understand that when we choose to include, when we choose to uh, have everybody belong and have their individual disabilities accommodated with authenticity and dignity and respect, the world is a more prosperous place.
Yeah. And I think by providing spaces like this, it gives the community more knowledge about how to support advocacy for the inclusion of people with disabilities, so that what Latrea was saying she was feeling about not wanting people to know she has this disability, or feeling that way about her disability, we can eliminate those feelings and more feeling of acceptance and compassion. Because when we include, not just to include for the legal aspect, but to include with really authenticity and compassion and acceptance, then you'll feel seen and heard. And whether you have a disability or not, everybody wants to see, feel seen and heard.
Right.
So this space, I think, is just a stepping stone for, as the title is today, breaking those barriers and building bridges.
And Dr. Taylor, this is Kirk. I wanted to ask Michelle to follow up on something that's really important. You mentioned the IEP, the Individual Education Plan.
Yes.
And we're celebrating Disability Pride Month because of the ADA, which is the law, and there are some other laws that are helpful. The Individuals with Disability Education Act that gives students with disabilities the right to a good education, and the IEP is so important. and many parents and families don't really know how powerful it can be and really how to leverage it fully. So I'd love, you say you work with middle school students. I'd love to hear your a few thoughts about the IEP.
Sure. A lot of my students, they have IEPs, and it is so important for them. Most of the students I work with are in general ed classes, so it's really
And
important
it's
that
the
they.
school, it's the school and the family agreeing, right, on what the child's
Right.
educational goals should be and what they're entitled
Yes.
to as far as resources and accommodation.
Right. The parent, they have their goals in there, what they're supposed to be doing, like how they're, what their disability is, and what their specific goals are, and what my role is in the classroom to be able to help them as well. Whether that's reading a test to them, whether it's just being able to help them. They might have specific needs too. Some of them might have, I've worked with visually impaired students. Some of them have specific ones where they have to have materials prepared in a certain way. Other ones might have a seizure. So we have to make sure we watch out for what they have as well. Some of those, they may not have an IEP with goals, but they'll have a 504 plan that will just say, especially ones that might have diabetes or allergies, these are things that they need to have, but we don't need to have specific goals, but we do need to know what happens if something would occur.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful.
I think that is really a great segue because we have quite a
Mm-hmm.
few of us who are educators in here. Tekedra, you didn't get a chance to introduce yourself earlier, so I'm going to ask you the next question. And I think, again, that can be another bounce off of a moment of conversation as we talk about education and advocacy. So, as someone who has an extensive experience in both recreational therapy and special education, Tekedra, how do you see the role of educators evolving? I think the question that Kirk just asked and Michelle's answer really was a great segue into that discussion on how, as educators, we can evolve to better support students with disabilities. But Tekedra, please just take a quick moment to introduce yourself and then just jump into answering that question. So we're having a bit of technical difficulty with Tekedra. Your phone is frozen. Okay.
I've worked with elementary, middle school students, and
Still just having just a little bit of trouble. Tekedra, I'm going to ask you to go back out and come back in. Your screen is freezing up. But we're going to bounce this over to Michelle, okay? Okay. And so Tekedra, I'm just going to ask you to go back out and come back in. So actually, Michelle, you are an advocate in education, and you've already had an opportunity to introduce yourself. I think that you can continue building on what you've already shared in terms of what the role in terms of education, what role does community partnership play in breaking down barriers? You talked about the 504 plan and all things in terms of the IEPs and building bridges for people with disabilities, because it's not just about what we do as educators in the school, right? It's also important to discuss, the power of partnership.
Right. Partnership is so important for connections and for just building those bridges. A lot of times what we try to do with our school is we will have students go out and they will be doing jobs in the community so they can get experience and they have that chance to maybe build a partnership if they want to have a job in the future. I know even for myself, it's so important. I have had some side jobs that I do where I've done writing and I've done some work with some other agencies that work with people with disabilities, and they're great with resources. I had a friend, I went to a Down syndrome convention last year, took my first solo flight, had my first trip by myself, and that's one of those things because I don't drive, so I never had that experience, but I was helping her out. And she goes, okay, I know, why don't you write a story about this? You'd love to write. And she introduced me to a news outlet that I could write a story with. She also introduced me to other advocacy groups that I've got a chance to be a part of. And some of those connections, networking is so powerful. People don't realize whenever you do meet another person, it's just one of those things that might lead to something else. And it's having that partnership where we can work with a lot of our students, or we can work with individuals in the workplace with providing accommodations and networking and just having all those opportunities. And as far as how long has the IEP been in existence, that came, I would have to look up the exact date, but that came along with one of the Education Acts, because that was in the 70s, I believe, because whenever I started kindergarten, that's when they found out I had a disability, and I was really lucky to have an IEP and a diagnosis, because it was just years after that.
Yep, I got an answer for that. It says the IEP was first introduced into school systems when the right of students with disabilities to attend public schools was legally recognized in the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, EHA, so in 1975. And that, I mean, I've been teaching for 20 years, and it's definitely something that we made a priority for an inclusive classroom. I want to spend a minute just discussing this, and we understand, Tekedra, you're out from Houston. They just had a big hurricane out there, so there might be some problems with connectivity, and we're just going to keep pushing forward. So that was a great question, Naheem. So it's always been in existence, but the thing is that all of this stuff exists, but it's whether or not parents are educated on what they have access to for their children, right? Because a lot of times we're advocating for inclusive classrooms, inclusive education, but I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this answer that you gave, the question that we have in terms of education, because then we should be able to just do a quick check-in. Tekedra, can you hear us? Are you good to go?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right, we hear you.
Great.
So in this discussion, we talk about advocacy. I want to just spend some time focusing on Michelle's answer with regards to education and community partnerships and building bridges, because I'm sure that Anthony and Kirk, you can chime in here. And then we'll switch that discussion back over to education. But a lot of times it's like this stuff exists, but parents don't even know what they can advocate for their children, right? So let me just, to Michelle's initial answer and the questions that we have in the audience, let me get some responses to that.
Yeah, I'll chime in a little bit here. In regards to the IEP, in regards to the policing, what the ADA means, what the AODA means here in Ontario, I think there's a lot of misconceptions of the depth of how people can advocate and how people can be more forthright with the rights of the ADA, the rights of the AODA, the policing of the AODA. Far too often it's not talked about as often as it should be. Therefore, not having the teeth nor garnering.
Anthony, this is Kirk. Just the AODA is accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act?
Correct. Yeah, the AODA is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And for me, living in Hamilton, Ontario, I find that the AODA isn't really garnered to the person with a disability. It's garnered to a minimum standard. It's garnered to compliance rather than meeting the needs of people with disabilities. And I think far too often that when we think about disability, we respect that to meeting a building code, meeting a minimum standard, meeting compliance. And we miss the mark when it comes to meeting those needs of people with disabilities. And I think within the AODA, within the ADA, we need to be more forthright with meeting that individual's needs by use of the IEP, by use of the one I'm trying to introduce here in Ontario is an individualized transit plan for paratransit users. To transition slightly and give people the autonomy, agency, dignity, and respect, that people with disabilities deserve.
And one thing that I would really like to see more of is inclusion of people with disabilities or the students in writing these IEPs. Giving them a voice in these educational decisions that we're making. They're allowed legally to have a voice, but I think that we should be able, as educators and people who are advocating for people with disabilities, kind of give them more of a push towards speaking up and being included in writing these goals and objectives and advocating for the services that they need. And again, that again would eradicate those feelings that they don't belong, we don't belong, or I wish I didn't have this disability, because now we're providing resources for you to learn more about this disability, not just for yourself, but for your family, for the communities. And it's also important for different cultural backgrounds to understand these disabilities as well. So it's about diversity, it's about inclusion, and it's about giving the knowledge that these different communities need in order to achieve breaking these barriers and building these bridges.
Right. And one of the things that in my practice, one of the things that I do is I work strongly with parents when it comes to advocating for their children. Especially I work on the elementary school level. So when it comes to advocating for your children, and I tell parents all the time that you are your child's biggest advocate at this point. And it is your job to go in and fight for your child. It is your job to go in and make sure that your child is getting what they need on the level in which they need it. And a lot of times I have parents that will come to me and they're like, oh, well, I don't want to go in there and I don't want to upset the system. Or I don't want to shake the system. Or I don't want the teachers or the administrators to be mad at me. And I'm like, well, none of that matters if your child is not getting what they need. Your job is to prepare them for life. Like this is their stepping stone and getting them prepared for life. And one day you're not going to be here. So is the time that we prepare them and get them ready for life and teach them that, you might ruffle a couple of feathers here and there, but that's okay. You need to go in and you need to get what you deserve under the law. And if you ruffle a couple of feathers or you make a couple of people mad, I'm not going to say it's okay, but at the end of the day, it's about what you need to get the best results. And a lot of times I find that parents are afraid to do that. They're afraid to go in. Or what they'll do is they'll go in and they'll have these IEP meetings and they won't understand anything that's going on. They won't understand nothing that nobody is saying. But they'll sign the paper under duress. And then when the outcome happens, they're like, well, wait a minute. I didn't know that this is what I was supposed to do. I didn't know that this is what I was signing. So I tell parents when they go into these IEP meetings, if you don't understand, do not sign anything you don't understand.
This is Kirk. Are you able to be there with them? Are you able to help guide them?
Sometimes I am. Sometimes and that's only if they commission me to be. There are parents that have commissioned me to go in with them because they don't, they just don't understand the whole process and how the process.
Thank you so much, Latrea. And I think that there's a segue into this question that we got from the audience. Michelle, you answer that?
Sure. One of the questions that we had is who will implement, who or what drives the implementation and utilization of the IEP? A lot of times, a teacher might notice that they have a student in the classroom that's just not getting it, and that can be the perfect way of just maybe mentioning it to the mom or dad. And a really important thing is with IEPs in the law, it's really a 3-tier process for just finding out and putting the services in. One of the first things usually is a teacher might notice, like they did for me whenever I was in school, that I was really struggling in the classroom and I was frustrated. So the teacher might start to use some of the not even an accommodation, but she might use some strategies in the classroom. Maybe she would work with me one-on-one, or maybe she would start to use some different kinds of, just some different ways of working with me. And if that's not working, then usually they'll consent to maybe have somebody that will come in like a school psychologist, or somebody just to come in and observe the student in the classroom and get some data to see how that's working. And based upon that and the consent of the parent, they will go forth and do the testing that's necessary to see if there's an issue going on. And after the testing is completed, they'll call the parents in for a meeting and they'll discuss the results. And we'll start to write some of the goals that can help the child and the family. And it's so important that the parents are also saying things that they're seeing too. And they can do that. And how we utilize the IEP is given to the general, it's given to a lot of people. I don't get to read a lot of them myself, and I don't get to go to a lot of the meetings, but the general ed teacher, everybody on that team knows what's going to happen. The general ed teacher knows, okay, in the classroom, I need to put my student that is hard of hearing in the front. And I also have an FM headset so I'm able to talk. And my para, if she's going to read a test to them, she's going to have it on. And I've even seen it where we'll pass it to students when we're reading in the classroom so they're able to hear it. My student who is visually impaired, the general ed teacher will give that to, if the student has a para and a vision teacher, that the materials will be prepared for them. So they'll be brailled and they have that. Sometimes they might have it where you might have to have somebody that escorts a student because they might be blind or visually impaired. And that's all written in the IEP for that. Busing is another service. Any services such as occupational therapy, speech therapy, all of those things are included in that IEP. And that's a legal document that says this is the student that has the disabilities and this is what they need. And there's just a specific role for everybody to play in that process.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Now I'm going to jump right in. Actually, this conversation is really being education focused. So I'm just going to kick it back to Tekedra now that she's on. And so I'm going to ask the question again. I think you guys can continue that discussion. Tekedra is someone who with extensive experience in both recreational therapy and special education. How do you see the role of educators? But I also want to kick continuing this discussion on education, but I also want to make sure that we kick it back to Michelle's earlier question that I asked her in terms of community partnerships, because we haven't engaged. Anthony has touched a little bit on that, but I'm looking for also some more holistic answers because we have a great feedback from the audience in terms of how do we engage not only in the classroom, but in the community. So I'm going to turn it over to Tekedra so that you can actually have an opportunity to introduce yourself, answer the question, and then let's spend a little bit of time again focusing on not only the education piece, but also what it looks like in terms of community partnership. And Kirk, and I'm sure you'll want to chime in too. So let me hand it over to you, Tekedra.
Okay. So again, I've worked in the educational and the clinical setting with people with disabilities, and I've worked with elementary through high school. So essentially what Ms. Steiner is talking about is the R process. And the R process is very important to the IEP. And that is where the general education teachers, as well as the parents, as well as related services, they're all there to advocate for the student. The student is also.
I'm sorry, Tekedra, this is Kirk. You're saying something process, and I'm not catching it. What is the process?
The art. So there's an annual meeting every year in education, and that's essentially what Ms. Steiner is speaking about, where the IEP is involved in discussing. We're discussing the data from the previous year, and goals that should be continued, maybe goals that need to be discontinued. And sometimes there are students who have been in special education since elementary school, and they've succeeded past these goals, and we can even move them or transition them out. And I think that there are a lot of students who say stuck in the system of special education that can be transitioned out. But because, as Latrea was speaking, parents don't want to rattle the system, and it's really not rattling the system. That's your legal right to advocate for your child. So it's not upsetting the system or rattling the system. You're literally advocating for yourself, and that's your legal right. And if you go into there, and I think one of the facilitators for the R meeting is the educational diagnostician. The DIAC has plenty of information and resources about legal aspects that parents can tap into. They set up community involvement or engagement nights where general education teachers and the parents and the community can come together as a whole to get a better understanding of special education and the needs that they need and the resources that are available for the people with disabilities. As for instance, when we talk about community engagement, there is a community or an organization called Best Buddies that can come into the school system or come into your home and provide Special Olympics. They can take your child or children with disabilities out for a day of fun. It's an inclusive environment to where you don't feel separated, but you feel included in the community so that you can start speaking up for yourself and you won't have that feeling of, oh, I'm rattling the system. Oh, I wish I didn't feel this way. Because essentially we want to all, again, I go back to the original point, feel seen and heard. And when you feel seen and heard, you can create a positive impact for the community.
I wanted to just chime into that, Tekedra, and to everybody. When we refer to special education, Special Olympics, are they not human needs for persons with disabilities? I'm not a fan of the term special when it comes to referring to people with disabilities. I feel like it's a separator rather than an includer to people with disabilities within our communities. I mean, all needs are human when it comes to defining ourselves as who we are. I understand that they may be uncommon to the proverbial norm, but in saying the term special, I feel like it's a separator than it is an includer.
I understand what you're saying, but in some way I disagree because we have to be honest with where we all are, right? And we're all uniquely created. There's something special about each one of us. So I personally have a problem with the term challenged.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But as far as special, I don't see nothing wrong with special because we're all special in some aspect.
And this was Kirk. So some of these things were named a long time ago. Right?
Yeah.
The Office for Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, part of the Department of Ed. Word Special Olympics was called Special Olympics a long time ago, but I certainly see your point, Anthony. Language is so important and it should be as empowering as possible. And it should, as much as possible, be the language that people would like their identity to be, their personal identity to be attached to. But I wanted just to say, Tekedra, I think you made a beautiful point. When we're supporting a person with a disability, a child with a disability, we need to really bring all the resources available to bear. And there's lots of resources out there that many families aren't quite aware of. So, I always think about government, for-profit, nonprofit, and community and family. So in the government, you've got the school district. Also, kids when they get to be 14, they're eligible for vocational rehabilitation services in the U.S. So every state has vocational rehabilitation agencies funded by the Department of Ed. So your disabled child with an impairment can start receiving vocational pre-educational training services paid for by the taxpayer. Then the corporate, the for-profit, the companies, they have the jobs, and so to connect with internship programs, opportunities for kids to get work experiences, etc. And then there are nonprofits. Tekedra mentioned Best Buddies. There's in any city of any size, there are nonprofits that have philanthropic dollars and expertise around supporting inclusion of people with disabilities. And then, of course, the families, the community, the advocacy groups. When my retina is detached when I was 5, my parents were 25. They had never met a blind person before before I became blind. And, they were not connected with groups. And it's so easy now with the internet. And I always tell parents of blind kids, Find the American Council of the Blind chapter, or the National Federation of the Blind chapter, and there's organization and chapters really for every disability, and there are parents and families who've experienced what you're experiencing, with kids who've gone through the journey that your kids are going to go through. So I think building that team and that network, and really including everybody, the government funded stuff, the nonprofits, the business community, and then other families, is great.
Yeah, Kirk, I gotta respond to that, and I love the way you eloquently spoke about that. I think lived experience doesn't get the notoriety or the respect that it deserves. I find that when you're bound by simply just a legislation, by a document, by a code, by a standard, you're not. And when you don't include the lived experiences of people with disabilities of all natures, proud to celebrate Disability Pride Month with my friends south of the border, as I've done here in Hamilton, where I'm from. The percentage of people with disabilities is actually greater than the provincial and national averages. 27.7% here in Hamilton identify as having at least one disability, 15 years of age or over. And disability, is not a possibility. It's really an inevitability. And oftentimes we're reactive to what disability is rather than proactive. And I feel like we drop the ball more often than not when we talk about disability from a reactionary standpoint. We look at it from a cost perspective rather than an investment. We look at disability as the negative. We look at, as I spoke about earlier, the fact that disability needs to be accepted, and people with disabilities need to belong. When we talked about earlier, child and youth with disability, we need to accept their filters. We need to accept that questions lead to answers, answers to understanding, and understanding to conversation, like a conversation that we're having today, so that we can get it. It's all about creating a legacy. The barriers that we break down today are for tomorrow's future.
And thank you so much, Anthony. Actually, this is a great segue into me asking you the question, because you have such a great background and expertise in law and policy. You've been behind and supported so many key initiatives. So as you continue speaking, I think that you can actually take time to answer the final question, and then you guys can all chime in for this discussion in terms of what you believe should be implemented. You've already answered some of that, right? To improve accessibility, disability, and inclusion. Accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities in the workplace. And we talk so much about education, but I still think that as we're answering these discussions, we need to, as you said, consider the international perspective and experience, as well as we talk about inclusive environments, looking at the workplace, and just from a community standpoint. So let me let you continue, but I wanted to make sure I threw that last question out to you,
absolutely,
that everybody would have a chance to also respond to you.
Well, in Canada, 90% of all accommodations for a person with a disability are $500 or less. And for many major organizations and corporations, that's really a drop in the bucket. And when we choose to include people with disabilities, not only from a workplace perspective, from a hiring perspective, from the ability to disclose, which is a real big topic in and of itself, when we put people with disabilities in charge and have them given the autonomy, agency, dignity, and respect within the workplace, we are more prosperous, and we include everybody. From the standpoint of the built environment, or from the standpoint of a whether it be a standalone or tangible or an intangible environment workplace, we've got to be via or accessible via the WCAG, which is the Website Compliance Accessibility Guidelines. We've got to be accessible and inclusive from our built environment, from the design of public spaces. And I think beyond what the legislation provides, hence my brand's name, Above and Beyond, we've got to go above and beyond what legislation says, because otherwise we're meeting minimum standards, otherwise we're meeting compliance. And really, more often than not, that doesn't meet the needs of people with disabilities. Thank you.
Who wants to respond to that? What I really love about what Anthony has to say is that so much of the discussion that we talk about is always minimum standards, right? and we're talking about compliance. So let me give you an opportunity to respond to that, because he talks about, like, like literally the name of your organization is Above and Beyond. It's about going above and beyond and not just meeting those minimum standards in advocacy. We have about 3 more minutes of discussion here, so I want to make sure I give you guys a chance to respond to Anthony's response.
The things I did like with Anthony is, yes, I think it is important about going above and beyond just what the minimum is. And I think it's also one of the frustrations I have is people can't see my disability. So I have to be the one to advocate for myself. And I've always told people, do not put me in situations where I have to do math. And the kids all know it and the staff does. And I had to discuss that with the principal, and we had a real issue last year with, I was working with new staff and they were expecting me to help students with math. And I had to be constantly going into the office. Well, I tried not to go in too much, but I had to tell people I'm not able to do this. And I think it's really not just saying, okay, we have this program. It's really responding to that and actually meeting the needs, and not just saying, all right, that we'll take care of it. And I just think that needs to be done a lot better, and listening to really what people need, not just jumping to conclusions.
And I think what Ms. Steiner said was so important is the fact that there are disabilities that you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
So we should create more environments where just the term disability is a safe word, is a safe space, is a comfortable atmosphere. And there should be more on-the-job training for working with people with disabilities. We provide on onboarding, you get so much paperwork, you get so much training, but rarely do you see onboarding where you have a step or a process where you're working with coworkers with disabilities.
Right.
And that's inclusive. That's including supporting people with disabilities. And again, there are disabilities that you cannot see from mental health. There are disabilities that you can't see that we should be able to support. So I agree with you.
And I want to piggyback on that myself. Unlike you guys that have disabilities that cannot be seen, my disability is very visual. Not very visual, but my disability is obvious. And based upon the fact that it's obvious, that makes it sometimes harder for me to get employed, because people look at me and automatically assume that, okay, because she looks like this, there's something inherently wrong up here, or she's not going to be able to do the job efficiently, or she's not going to be able to complete the task in the manner in which we're able to. And I have to say, as a disabled person, I have surprised so many people, because they're just shocked and amazed at the fact that I come in and I'm able to not only do my job, but do my job at a very successful level, a higher level than what they've ever expected. So I want to put that charge out there to employers who are looking at a person that happens to have a disability. And this disability may be very visual, but don't automatically assume that because they have a disability that you may be able to see that somehow mentally discredits them, or that somehow discredits them in a way that prevents them from doing the job in the manner in which you need them to do.
I love that. Kirk, did you want to plug? We got about 60 seconds left.
No, I think that was Anthony starting to say something.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to quickly chime in to Latrea's words. What you can't see with me is I'm actually sitting on a wheelchair. So I do too also have a physical disability that, in the instance of a Zoom call is not something that is visual.
Yeah.
The Brady Bunch were the creators of the original Zoom call, as we come to talk about. But that being said, I love this conversation, and I'm glad to have been part of it. So thank you.
All right. Got about 30 seconds left for this part of the conversation. Kirk, did you want to chime in? Because I'm sorry, that was you chiming in, Anthony. But I was
I just say I was with 24 blind high school kids yesterday, And what we talked about was the strengths that they're developing. Living every day with a disability allows you to develop strengths that are really unique. Resilience, perseverance. People with disabilities are the best creative problem solvers in the world. And you just bring a lot of value to everything you do and everyone you interact with. And to look at your disability as something that gives you strength. And I think that everyone on this panel seems to be right in that mode.
I just want to say that this has been really an amazing conversation. It could probably go on for another hour. And if you guys, if you've seen me do these panels before, the people that I bring on, guys, are so passionate about what they do. So I'm often in the back wrangling the conversation, and Jules and I are handling logistics. But we appreciate the passion, and we're going to continue to share this event. It's going to be available on our YouTube and Facebook. And this final conversation round, or we'll do, this is where we do our shameless plug. I'm actually going to start with Anthony. And when we do this around the room, we give you 60 to 90 seconds to tell us, to make one final point. Tell us where you're going to be next. Tell us where people can find you. But this is really that soundbite piece, right? If you want to share one thing with the audience in this 60 to 90 seconds, share that one final piece, and then tell folks where they can find you, so that as we begin to wrap up this conversation. So Anthony, give us your shameless plug. There you go.
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, I'm the founder of Above and Beyond, Bridging the Gap to Accessibility and Inclusion. I'm an author, actor, speaker, coach, and consultant. I've helped build Ontario's first fully accessible barrier-free park in Marydale Park, located in Midbrook, Ontario. As for where I can be seen next, I do a lot of education and workshops on and with PSW students on different types of disability etiquette. In July, I'll be a part of a celebration and dance party for kids and youth with disabilities, giving them the opportunity to be out in the community and just have fun. And I host a show on Cable 14, cable14.com, typically Mondays at 9, going into season 6. Thank you so much.
Okay, any final thoughts or words of wisdom that you want to share with the audience, Anthony?
Yeah, I'll share the words of my mentor. His name is Rick Hansen, and he states, "If you believe in a dream and have the courage to try, anything is possible." Rick sustained a spinal cord injury in 1975 as a result of a boating accident, and started his foundation, the Rick Hansen Foundation, in the early 80s. And I've really kind of piggybacked and dedicated the work that I do with Above and Beyond, not only to my mother, who passed away in 2016, but to piggyback off the work from the Rick Hansen Foundation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I just need to give a shout out to Michelle, because it was a podcast interview that I did with Michelle earlier this year during Women's History Month, who she mentioned Disability Pride Month. And I said, we got to do something for this month. So shout out to Michelle. And so, Michelle, what are your final words of wisdom and your shameless plug? Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much. My final words of wisdom are, it's really important that with my work with students, that we prepare our students for going out after graduation, because our students may leave us and may graduate, but so many of them are going to have their disability is going to stay. And so many of them might even have other disabilities. So I think it's just so important that we have these discussions and these community partnerships to be able to equip people as they go out into the workplace. Very important that employers understand what disabilities are, and also coworkers as well. And the person that has one, that it's not a shameful thing to have a disability. It's a part of life that happens, and to just be able to include people in that. You can also find me at my blog, www.mrsmichellesmission.com. And at my blog, I write about life with a learning disability. And I also feature my photography for my walks, because I'm not able to drive. So I get that chance to stop and smell the roses, and that's on my website. And I'm also going to be speaking at an in-person transition conference in State College, PA, on Wednesday, and showing how to have a successful transition plan. And that is my first in-person event for a few years. So I'm very excited about that.
I have to ask you, what is a transition plan? What are we referring to, Michelle?
Right. This is students and families that have that's in Pennsylvania or around, and what they're trying to do is, after our student leaves, what resources are available? How can they set goals? How can they achieve them? And it's we have students that are coming in. Some of them are college students. They're sharing their stories and how they're successful. We have different people from agencies such as vocational rehabilitation, and it's just showing what resources are available and just different ways on how to transition.
I love that. Thank you so much, Michelle. Uh, Latrea, your final words of wisdom, and where can people find you next?
Okay, so my final words of wisdom is my mantra is limiting never limit your beliefs. Never limit the belief that you have about yourself. Never limit the belief that you have about your abilities. The only limits that matter are the limits that you set on yourself. And if you release yourself from those limits, you can do anything. Um, you can catch me. I'm on Facebook. I'm on all social media platforms. My website is www.coachlatrea.net. I'm a speaker. I'm a coach as well as a published author. I have my most current book here. I don't know if you guys can see it or not. Yeah, there we go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this is my most current book. This is my seventh book. You can get this off of my website. And if you get it off the website, you get some other extra goodies to go along with it. And this basically just talks about my journey with my disability and my background and how I came through, on the other side.
Amazing. And I have to go back to Michelle talked about her writing. Anthony, have you published any books? Because I always forget to tell people, if you got a book, you hold it up and we'll share that information in the audience. All right. So let me go back to Anthony really quick.
I'm sorry. Yeah, how convenient. I have a book available on Amazon entitled Above and Beyond, how apropos. Everything has really been premised about above and beyond for me. It's not about for me showing the community what I can do, but just showing the community what I'm capable of doing, and seeing how the community responds. Not showing it to prove anything to anybody, but
Right.
more so to prove it to myself. So thank you.
Right. And guys, we're also going to be partnering with Michelle, because Michelle, I did not forget to do a collaborative blog post. So we'll share her writings with our audience. So that'll be coming. If you signed up for our mailing list, we'll definitely be sharing that before the month is over. We'll have Juice reach out. And I want to go to Tekedra. I have you do your shameless plug. Give us some words of wisdom, and where can people find you next?
Okay. I guess my shameless plug would be I'm a Christian counselor. You can connect with me at adoveoflove.com, where I am able to more or less coach you through mindset in the form of biblical aspects and Christian principles, as well as my words of wisdom would be um, I kept saying over and over again, be seen and be heard. To me, that's what inclusivity is. And when we do that, when we allow people with real authenticity and sincerity to be seen and heard from a place of compassion and acceptance, that is breaking barriers and building or bridging the gap. That is what we're doing here today. We're fostering the community with inclusion by being seen and being heard. So I think that is very important for disability or not, to be seen and be heard with authenticity and compassion.
Thank you so much, Tekedra. And then I'm kicking it to Kirk, my fantastic
Thank you.
co-host
Thank you.
today.
Thanks so much for having me. Great meeting you all. I look forward to being in touch. My words of wisdom are just reach out. Reach out. You don't need to do this alone. So please reach out. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn very actively. It's Kirk Adams, PhD on LinkedIn. I have a new website. I'm happy to report. The name of my consulting company is Innovative Impact. So it's innovativeimpact.consulting. And I help companies to supercharge their bottom line through disability inclusion.
I just want to say, so we're working to get that in the chat, that new website, but we did pop everything else up, and I just love the little fantastic and fancy way that we're using StreamYard today. Guys, I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this panel. It's really important that we have this discussion on DEIA, and there's been so much debate. DEI can be such a very triggering thing when people hear it, and then people forget the A. I just read an article the other day where one organization is saying we're only going to use the D and the I. But here at Work Solutions, we're sticking with DEIA, right? Because we want to make sure that we foster and support inclusive environments. And we have these conversations. We'll continue with this roundtable panel through October, and this is going to become the Diversity Works Roundtable series is going to become a standard with our organization. We'll host these panels every year with different themes throughout the year. So what do we have coming up next? On August 10th, we have our BIPOC panel, our For Belonging panel. In September, we have our Women's DEIA panel. And then in October, we're going to end this series with our Educational DEI panel. Some of you might want to come back to do a live, make some comments, because there were so many questions today on education, and very, very much passion behind it and the power of partnership. What's happening with me next? So we're going to share some links in the chat. My shameless plug is we just dropped a book. My sister and I, Dr. Kristy Taylor, we dropped a book, Colorful Careers in Healthcare. We haven't even begun to do the PR on that book yet, and it's already selling well. But this is written from the perspective of a teacher with 20 years of experience, and both of us are educators and healthcare professionals. We wanted children to be able to open a book and see themselves like that, represented in that book. So we have Colorful Careers in Healthcare, which is a book with 42 different healthcare careers, teaches children about all of these different healthcare careers. Is literally a QR code that they can scan. We produced and edited every single video that came with this book, and also just dropped my framework, the REBT DEIA framework. Coach Latrea talked about overcoming limiting beliefs. I use rational emotive behavioral therapy coaching. That's the REBT, a cognitive behavioral model for coaching with each of my clients. So we'll be doing work around that. And then finally, we are launching our Kickstart Your Career series starting in August, and you'll hear more about that. So those are my plugs, and we have about 1 minute left. And I just want to say again, thank you to the audience today. You guys have really been amazing. Thank you to the panel today. You all have been amazing. I learned so much from each of you. If you want to hear the playback of this, we're going to release this is going to be available on YouTube. We're also going to upload it to our iHeartRadio, as well as Spotify and Pandora, which is where our podcast is available on. And we will also be available as a playback on Facebook, LinkedIn, and across our social media platforms. Again, thank you for tuning in today. We would love to hear your feedback. You can fill out the job form that we are dropping in the chat, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Have a great day. Thank you, guys. You did an awesome job. Amazing panel.